Dear friends, on December 18, 2024, the Italian newspaper, L'Opinione della Libertà, published a new article of mine titled Pope Francis' Green Economy, Solidarity or Socialism? Enjoy the reading. On November 24, 2024, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP29, concluded in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. The conclusions reached by the participating states do not differ from the usual socialist rhetoric tinted green. Nearly 200 participating countries agreed to replace the previous goal of mobilizing $100 billion annually by 2025 with a new goal of $300 billion annually by 2035. Additionally, the aim is to mobilize at least $1.3 trillion annually, including both public and private financing. However, no new obligations for the transition from fossil fuels were established, contrary to expectations. In simple terms, literally, states need to tax their citizens more. International reactions to the agreement, however, have been predominantly negative. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed disappointment at the lack of ambition, while many representatives of developing countries denounced the agreement as insufficient and unambitious. The most interesting aspect is perhaps the attitude of countries like China and Saudi Arabia, which have hindered any significant progress on emission reductions. This is interesting because, although green rhetoric wants to blame all climate change, real or alleged, on Western capitalism, the main obstacles come from the world's most authoritarian and socialist countries. Nevertheless, the solutions being proposed are of a socialist nature, so much so that, in recent years, many regulations adopted in the climate field and beyond by bodies such as the European Union do not differ much, upon close analysis, from the regulations implemented in authoritarian countries like China. This social environmentalist rhetoric is so pervasive that it has even infiltrated cultures traditionally seen as conservative, such as the Catholic one. At the opening of the conference, Pope Francis, through the Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin, released a message expressing significant concerns about the results achieved. COP29 takes place in a context conditioned by growing disillusionment with multilateral institutions and increasing tendencies to build walls, wrote the Pope. Therefore, it would be urgent to establish a new international financial architecture that can truly ensure all countries, especially the poorest and those most vulnerable to climate disasters, pathways to low-carbon and highly shared development, allowing everyone to reach their full potential and see their dignity respected. We have the human and technological resources to reverse the course and pursue the virtuous circle of integral development that is truly human and inclusive. The concept itself is correct. However, Pope Francis' Green Magisterium, ostensibly focused on the preservation of creation, actually appears as the uncritical acceptance of the socialist agendas promoted by the European Union and the United Nations. This approach, although cloaked in moral motivations, is actually lacking not only scientifically but also economically, and it diverts the ecclesiastical magisterium from its true task, to safeguard faith and morals. Pope Francis' main proposals on the environmental front, such as those expressed in the encyclical Laudato Si', originate from European and global ecological transition policies, but overlook the evident scientific and economic shortcomings of such strategies. The Pope writes in the message, "The scientific data we have do not allow for further delays and clearly show that the preservation of creation is one of the most urgent issues of our time." Is it really so? A recent report by the Commission on Growth and Development analyzed, for example, the economic consequences of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the European Union initiative designed to address carbon emissions related to the importation of certain products, which has been in a trial phase since October 2023. European companies already pay a tax for the carbon emissions they produce when manufacturing goods. Due to this initiative, companies must also pay for the emissions caused by products imported into the European Union, such as cement, steel, aluminum. This way, it aims to prevent European companies from relocating production to countries with weaker environmental regulations, where they do not have to pay for their emissions. According to this study, However, the implementation of this mechanism would result in significant per capita GDP losses, especially for the economies of those states that depend on global supply chains. The goal of this European initiative translates into widespread economic penalties without effectively addressing the problem of global emissions. Alternative solutions, such as those proposed by the Climate and Freedom Accord, CFA, show that approaches based on positive incentives and economic freedom could not only reduce carbon emissions but also improve economic well-being. The CFA is an international agreement that proposes as a solution to environmental problems and poverty a greater opening of markets to competition and innovation and the introduction of very specific tax cuts to incentivize investments in low-emission technologies. The underlying belief is that freer economies are also cleaner and more prosperous. It has been calculated that such an approach would have, in the United Kingdom alone, a potential increase in per capita GDP of over £1,000. This vision highlights how the free market, rather than centralized bureaucracy, can represent a sustainable response to climate change, regardless of its actual anthropogenic origin, which is still debated. In contrast, Pope Francis seems to adhere to the catastrophic and interventionist vision of global institutions, neglecting economic models that respect freedom and promote well-being without burdening the most vulnerable populations. This approach not only ignores alternative solutions but risks legitimizing policies that impoverish nations in the name of ideological environmentalism. The Catholic Church has always recognized that economics and politics, while relevant arts for human order, are not exact sciences. Therefore, their value depends on their ability to serve the common good in harmony with the principles of faith and morals. However, in the past 11 years, the ecclesiastical magisterium seems to have focused almost exclusively on economic, social, and environmental issues. Pope Francis' Green Magisterium cannot be understood outside the ideological context in which it unfortunately fits. The global climate policies promoted by the EU and the UN are based on questionable economic and scientific models that do not fully consider the consequences for the weakest populations. At the same time, the Church's growing involvement in these issues risks compromising its mission in the world, reducing it to a mere NGO serving the worst socialist agendas globally.